Right. Well, great. Well, thank you so much to everyone for joining today. Um, my name is Nicole Holybar Walker, and I serve as Managing Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Emory Alumni Association. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements for today's session. First, please note that the views and opinions expressed in our learning development webinars are those of the speakers and not necessarily reflecting the official policy, position, or views of Emory University, the Emory Alumni Association, or its affiliates. The content provided in this program is for informational purposes and should not be construed as an endorsement by Emory University or the Emory Alumni Association. Moving forward, this session is being recorded. Please be sure to keep your microphones muted to avoid any disruptions. So we encourage you to keep your camera on. This will likely be an interactive session. So we encourage you to share any questions that you might have throughout the session in the chat box, or when it gets to interactive sessions, you can unmute yourself. So with that, I am excited to introduce our featured speaker today, Sarah Savella. Sarah is the founder of the Savella Group. Sarah has built her career helping some of the world's leading companies connect people with their organizations to drive business strategy and results. Working as a consultant and coach, as well in leadership roles internally, she brings change management, leadership, learning, and organizational development expertise to organizations across industries. Sarah truly understands the complexities of leading in today's organizations, and as a certified executive coach, combines her passion for developing leaders with her experience navigating change. At an individual level, she coaches executives and senior leaders for development of critical skills, as well as evolution of their leadership journey. Please help me give a warm welcome to Sarah.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. So glad to see you here, especially from Milan, Italy. I'm very jealous as I sit here in New York. That was a great introduction, so I won't spend too much time talking about myself. But as most of you know, we're here because I'm an Emory alumni or alumnus. I graduated in 2005 with a bachelor's in psychology, and then I went on to get my master's in industrial organizational psychology from NYU. I founded the Savella Group 7 years ago, which is crazy to think that I'm 7 years on this journey of having my own business. But before that, I worked inside and outside of organizations in consulting, but also in other leadership roles. I have a background in change management and org change, transformation, and design. And I also spent time doing some HR work. So I moonlighted or moonlit as a head of HR for 4 years when I went out on my own. The majority of my practice now is executive coaching, and I do a lot of leadership development work as well. As you'll see here, I work primarily with scaling and tech companies, so companies that are going through a large amount of growth and change. But I also have spent a lot of time working with larger financial institutions, the pharmaceutical industry, among others. So I really have that experience working with many different sizes of organizations. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Here's our agenda. We're going to do a look back, so a quick walk through time. We'll understand how leadership evolved through history. Then we'll take a look at the current landscape. What are some of our most pressing leadership challenges today? And then we'll also do a look ahead. So we'll say, how do we get set up for what leadership looks like in the future? All right, we're going to do a very quick pulse check. Instead of sending you over to Menti, since we have a smaller group today, I'm going to ask you to just open the chat. And I would love to hear from you. How confident are you in navigating the leadership landscape today? So when you think about leadership, and you think about everything that's going on as a leader, if you're supporting leaders or you want to be a leader, how confident are you in your ability to actually navigate this landscape? And you could give yourself a rating from 1 to 5. 1 is not confident at all, and 5 is extremely confident. Okay, I see 2 4s. I see a 3-ish. Okay, love that. I love an ish. Anything else? Okay, so it looks like we're doing relatively somewhere in the middle. We have four. So we're getting there. We feel a little bit confident. There's obviously a little bit of room for improvement. And let's see where we can go throughout our journey today. So let's start with our look back. So I loved doing this. So hopefully this will feel very relevant and interesting for you. But I Googled what was the earliest stage or form or theory of leadership. And it was so interesting to see. This is the early days. So pre-1920s, leadership really started to take form through this idea of the great man theory. I think even just the name of that is so interesting today in 2024. But this was the belief that leaders were born with certain heroic traits and abilities. So if you think about a leader back then, it was a single great man who then influenced other people to follow because he had these very heroic traits. As leadership evolved over time, we got into the 1920s, where this idea of trait theory began to come to life. It was an evolution of the idea of great man theory, but we started to see that leaders have certain characteristics that distinguish them from non-leaders. If you're familiar with any current assessments like the Hogan or anything like that, we see that some of this is still in our theories and ideas today. So sometimes we see leaders have certain traits that seem to distinguish them from non-leaders or people who want to be leaders versus those who don't. This was the idea that leaders are born, not made. Over time, this evolved into behavior theory. So around the 1950s, we started to see, okay, leaders have certain traits that they might be born with, but they also differ in their behavior and how they tend to show up. So we looked at how leaders behave towards their quote unquote followers, and we started to see which behaviors are demonstrating leadership in certain ways. Somewhere after that, around the 1960s, there was this shift to transactional leadership, which focused on exchanges or transactions between leaders and their employees. It operated on a system of rewards and punishments to really achieve and use compliance to motivate employees to get work done. After that, we shifted into the 1980s, which was situation theory. So when we were in that transactional place, communication tended to be largely one way, with leaders providing instruction and clear feedback based on outcomes. And while it was effective, it generally didn't really encourage that much innovation or personal growth. So situation theory came where leaders started to consider that there are different contextual variables that influence effective leadership. I should change the way that I show up depending on the situation that I'm in. So if anyone's heard of the term situational leadership, this is when that started. I got certified in situational leadership in my second job, and I still use it today because it's very important for leaders to be thinking about how they can then tailor their approaches to the situation and the person at hand. So that was the 80s. And as we continue to evolve from great man theory, in the early 2000s, we started to engage with something called transformational leadership theories. So this was a style that really looked to inspire and motivate people through vision, values, personal growth. It's more of a people-centered and forward-looking approach. And what we learned is that transformational leaders actually encourage transformation. So they encourage employees to really exceed expectations by aligning with some larger organizational values, vision, and again, this idea of fostering personal growth. So you might have heard some of these examples that you see up here on the slide: authentic leadership, servant leadership, where I show up every day in order to serve my people, or this idea of purpose-driven leadership. So purpose-driven leadership is a newer version of servant leadership, where we're actually trying to connect people to a purpose. We're understanding their motivations, and how that then goes and drives the way that they show up at work. So we took that walk through time. Let's do a recap. So where did we start and where are we now? So we went from this idea of control, emphasizing compliance, command, to a more of a place of influence or empowerment. We want to influence our team members to work in a certain way and empower them. Second, we went from a short-term view, so early leadership styles focused on the immediate task completion, whereas today, much of leadership emphasizes more of that long-term vision and personal development. And then lastly, we went from more structure, so rigid structure of management, very hierarchical, where we shifted to a more adaptable and flexible leadership approach because we need to be able to adapt and be flexible with the dynamic challenges of modern organizations. So that was a little bit of a walk through time. I would love to hear from you. Where do you see some of these theories showing up for you today, either as a leader or an employee? You could take yourself off of mute and talk if you'd like to, or you can go ahead and type into the chat. So where do you see some of this showing up for you today?
I'm happy to start.
Yeah, well,
Robert.
I would say that the emphasis in all of the conversations is on adaptability, agile. They're using that term agile a lot for that basic idea that things are changing so fast. If you're not changing along with them quickly and how you deal with them, you're out to lunch.
Yeah, you're going to be left behind. As a quick spoiler alert, you set the stage, Robert, so well for what's to come because the pace of change is so fast. If we're not adapting, we can't keep up with it. So agile leadership. I love that. What else?
I was just going to say it's really interesting to see all of the different phases over the last 100 or so years and how timeframes relate to leadership thought. I will say, having worked in nonprofit and higher ed for my entire career, the terms of servant leadership and purpose-driven leadership are very prevalent. And I think it's interesting to think about how people lead differently and have chosen to lead differently in the last 20 years, especially.
Yeah.
Incorporating their passions and purpose into their work.
Yeah, absolutely. The last thing I'll add there is we still see some of these themes from that great man theory or really trait theory that come through today. So there are certain traits, and we'll talk about those in a little bit, that do make a great leader, but those are evolving over time. So we know there are certain traits and behaviors, but they're evolving over time. Let's take a look at today's landscape. So many of you might be familiar with Ken Blanchard. He is a big name and has been around for a while in leadership. But he has this quote which says, "The key to successful leadership today is about influence and not authority." And I think what that does is it really encapsulates everything that we're talking about. This quote resonated with me because it really captures this shift from transformational leadership to what we need from leaders today. Let's talk about why. So I mentioned Robert's spoiler alert, but we need to be able to adapt to challenges and changes that we're facing, both in the macro and micro environment. So leaders have been facing and are facing unprecedented challenges like navigating remote work, leading diverse teams, addressing global crises like the COVID-19 pandemic. We are thinking about multi-generational workforces. There's a much greater focus on inclusion and how the macro environment affects employees at all levels. So leading through this amount of crisis and change means that the leadership emphasis is shifting to more of this focus on empathy and inclusion, as well as different behaviors that leaders need in order to show up. So in the beginning of this year, HBR came out with an article that looked at leadership over the past 10 years and how it's evolved. Has anyone seen that article? You can raise your hand or do a reaction. Okay, so basically what it did was it looked at leadership qualities in 2012 and leadership qualities in 2022, and we're going to dive a little bit more deeply into this data now. Okay, so before I share what executive presence looks like today, what do you think it looks like? You can share 1 to 2 words that come to mind, and you can type that into the chat. What do you think executive presence looks like today? Confidence. Okay, it's too confident. Yeah, being confident. What else? EQ, I love that, Dave. Yes, so much more of an emphasis on how we are showing up with emotional intelligence. Okay, we got that twice too. And we actually know that EQ is a greater predictor of leadership success than IQ. So the research actually tells us that. The other thing about EQ is that it can be learned. So we can actually build some of these skills and behaviors. You'll see this idea of confidence and EQ show up as we go through the rest of the presentation. Okay, so we'll start to take a look, but I want to ground this in the fact that over the past decade, again, a result of a pandemic, political and economic instability, social movements such as Black Lives Matter, Me Too, changing workforce technology, what people expect from leaders has fundamentally changed. So let's take a look at three different components. The first one we are going to look at is gravitas. So we'll define gravitas here really as presence, how people show up, the impact that they have on a room. So this study was conducted, and this shows that while confidence and decisiveness are still paramount for gravitas, pedigree has become less central. And new weight is given to inclusiveness, respect for others. Vision has moved up on the list. Integrity has moved down on the list. So this is how we see how leadership traits for gravitas have changed over the past 10 years. I'll be quiet for about 5 seconds and give you a chance to take a look at this in more detail. Okay, let's take a look at the same list for communication traits. So on the communication front, superior speaking skills and the ability to command a room still lead as the list of desirable attributes. What's interesting is now it says command a room and command Zoom. So we're starting to see how technology and virtual ways of working are becoming even more important. This idea of having a listen to learn orientation that was not on the list 10 years ago in 2012 or 14 years ago now, but forcefulness was, and that's not on the list now at all. Joking and bantering has now been replaced with this idea of authenticity. So that's on the rise. So these are the communication traits that have evolved over the past 10 years. Let's take a look at the last graph that was part of this research. And these are appearance traits, so interesting. Looking at 2012 versus 2022, projecting authenticity is also key to the appearance component of executive presence. That is now in the second spot. You'll see that over there on the right. So are dressing for the new normal, having an online image or brand, and a willingness to show up in person. I'll pause here for a minute and see if anyone has any questions. So I'd love to hear from you. Which of these traits resonates the most with you? Which of these resonates the most with you and why?
It's Sarah, this is Dave. I'm willing to jump in here. I was really shocked to see the trait of integrity falling way down, almost to the bottom. And it just makes me think of the dishonest, right, society we live in sometimes, especially when you inject politics into the fray. But yeah, just shocked by that. And you know, I took the strengths assessment, and belief was one of the highest traits for me. So integrity falls right in line. So a little disappointed that it's not at the top anymore.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. When every time I look at the data, something new stands out to me. And that's why I love this research that HBR did so much. And I noticed that too. It's a little bit surprising that integrity has fallen. But your hypothesis, I think, is a good one, which might be this is the environment and the climate that we've maybe been living in over the course of the past couple of years. Nicole, tell us a little bit about your comment around being surprised that polish and look are still so high.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting maybe to see it in a couple years, because I think at least environments in the workplace seem to be relaxing a bit, especially with remote work. I think this probably goes beyond even the way someone might dress or fix their hair or something along those lines. It might also go along the lines of the way people carry themselves, and how that translates physically as well. So yeah, I think I was kind of shocked that that one was
Yeah.
still higher up on the list.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, maybe a hypothesis for that, and I'm just making this up live here, is that we still innately look at people based on their appearance. And that's why that was even in this research still, that was kind of the third graph. So I wonder if that could be the case. One that I thought was interesting was this willingness to show up in person. I was commuting yesterday with a friend of mine. We were heading on the train to New York City, and we were talking about how everyone that has had to go back in person, so people who were fully remote and now have to go back in person to work, she made an interesting observation, which was each of those people wish that they could go into the office one less day than they're required to. So she said, I have to go 3 days. I wish it was 2. The people that have to go 4, they wish it was 3. And I just thought that was interesting because we hear headlines like Amazon requiring 5 days back in the office. And so this willingness to show up in person seems to be something that's critical. And it will be interesting to see how that continues to evolve over the next 5 years as well. Any other thoughts on this?
I really like that the respect for others was on there. It's a little shocking that it wasn't on there prior, but I think that also is very telling of the times and just the fact that that needed to be called out. But I'm happy that it is on there.
Yeah, yeah. Such a good point, Hani. I mean, respect, you would think even in 2012, that would have been really high on the list. I can see, though, how that's gaining traction and momentum because with all of these changes that we've been facing in the world, we need to make sure that we're showing up with this idea of respect, which leads into the idea of empathy. I can put myself in someone else's shoes. I can envision what they're going through so that I can help them and tailor my style towards theirs. Thanks for bringing that up. As we start to shift and look towards the future, we'll do this as a larger group discussion. I'm curious to hear from you. What do you think leadership will look like in the next 10 years? Which skills do you think will be most crucial? So now we're looking to kind of 2034. What do you think will be most crucial?
I think there's a lot. I think the ability to work intergenerationally is extremely important and will continue to be extremely important. Again, as people decide to transition careers, I've seen more people enter the workforce at more entry-level positions, but have maybe 20 years of experience in a different field. So I think it's going to continue to be really important because I think leaders are going to be very different in terms of their education, age, background. So I think that will be extremely important from a leadership perspective. I also think conflict management or conflict resolution and being comfortable with difficult conversations is going to continue to be something that's extremely valuable for leaders, especially with, I think, the way our society is, where there is a lot of divisiveness for people personally and even professionally. And people are maybe becoming more comfortable sharing their feelings inside the workplace. I think that leaders are really going to have to get to feel more comfortable having those difficult, maybe awkward conversations sometimes with their employees that they maybe haven't
Yeah.
had to in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole has not seen the rest of this presentation, but she's hit on a couple of things that are in here and spot on. So we will talk about the multi-generational workforce. Amy's giving you a thumbs up. And we'll also talk about a leadership skill set being really able to navigate critical and difficult conversations and be decisive. And we know that as we're leading through change, decisiveness is a really important and critical skill set for a leader. Anything else that anyone wants to share?
I think the idea still of like agility, adaptability, like it might be called a new buzzword, but I think that whole idea is still going to be super, super relevant. Just when you think about like multi-generational or that, like there's just so much noise and in life and everything getting kind of intertwined that ability to like go with the flow and be able to adapt is, I think, still going to be very, very relevant.
Thank you so much, Hani. That's such a good point. It's also making me think that we talk a lot about burnout for team members, but do you know the group that has the highest levels of burnout? It's managers, because they have to take all of this information and process it and then be able to do something with it while leading a team, dealing with their lives outside of work. So we need to make sure that as we're being agile, we're also staying focused on well-being as leaders as well. Okay, so here we go. Ta-da. Let's take a look at what's next. Where are we headed in the next 10 to 15 years? So we mentioned so much of this, but leaders will need to be equipped to handle this continued pace of change. But guess what? It's going to be happening even faster. Cost of living crisis, return of inflation, continued globalization of the workplace, managing people who are currently in the Middle East. And what does that mean for them? While also paying attention to a team that's here domestically. There's continued hybrid working, a high increase of burnout, and for the first time in history, having 5 generations in the workplace. So leading this diverse group will require a new set of skills. And to Hani's point, leaders need to be able to adapt at an even faster pace of change. And we're going to start with our first big change, which is advancements in AI and automation. So let's start with that. I first want us to set the stage. AI is not just a technological advancement. I think we're seeing that it is a true catalyst for change in leadership and the workplace. So in the past, we've heard about things like the industrial era and the technology era. We are just way beyond that now. Does anyone remember the show The Jetsons? Did anyone watch that as a kid? Okay, I see a few heads nodding. So I looked it up because I was curious. When did the Jetsons come out and when were they meant to be living? So it was meant to be that the Jetsons were living in the year 2062. So it was 100 years later than when the show came out. And they were flying cars then. Do you think that it's going to take us till 2062 to figure out how to get cars to fly? Probably not. So the future of leadership is in making sure we are embracing these changes, adapting our strategies, and if we can leverage AI, will help drive innovation. I'm curious how many of you use AI tools now. You can go ahead and type that in the chat. How many of you use AI tools now? ChatGPT is my BFF. Absolutely use them. Anyone else? Google Gemini. Okay, so this is a moment of vulnerability, but I was a little late to adapting AI tools to this game. I was a little bit resistant, even as someone who has studied and taught change management, because it felt overwhelming to me. But what I'm realizing now is that if I don't embrace some of these changes, I'm not going to be able to bring my own leadership into wherever we're going. So AI and automation are not just buzzwords. They are reshaping how we work and how we lead. let's take a quick look at how it's evolved in the workplace. So it's evolving at a remarkable pace. We just used the Jetsons example. We're moving from basic automation tasks to more advanced applications, machine learning, natural language processing. AI is so capable of handling really complex data, decision-making, and even creative tasks, sometimes better than we are. My husband is a physician, and we often talk about whose job might be impacted more by AI, his or mine. And we're trying to sometimes have that debate around what that could look like, and there's no clear answer. Think about the current dock worker strike right now happening on the East Coast. Not only are they fighting for higher wages, but they're fighting for job security among this crazy pace of change towards and with automation. So AI is becoming integrated into everyday business operations, from chatbots handling customer service inquiries to analytics, providing insights into market trends. So it's more integrated than ever. And we need to make sure that we're keeping up with this in a leadership capacity. What it does do, there are many benefits. It frees up employees to focus more on strategic and creative roles. It allows employees who are in more operational and tangible roles to think a little bit differently, maybe come up with better ways of doing things. So it can drive innovation and efficiency. As we all saw, you are using AI in order to do that, to be more efficient and to be more productive. So there are 4 key leadership shifts for us to be thinking about due to the evolving nature of AI. The first one is just adapting to technological change. So leaders need to be really adept at navigating the integration of AI in their organizations. It's not going away. If anything, it's just going to be integrated even further into the ways that we work. This means understanding the tools, the impact of them on job roles, and how to manage some of these changes the most effectively. This leads to fostering a culture of innovation. So with AI transforming some job functions, the ways that we show up and do our work, leaders have to cultivate an environment that encourages continuous learning and innovation. This means supporting employees in new skills, giving them training and learning opportunities. And it also means ethical considerations. So as AI becomes more prevalent, ethical leadership becomes more crucial. We need to make sure that we're using AI in a way that addresses concerns around privacy, bias, and the potential for job impacts. And then finally, we might need to redefine roles and responsibilities. So AI is a tool that can help us, and it's also a tool that can complicate things. So we need to shift traditional roles and responsibilities in some cases. Perhaps we need to redefine job descriptions, create new roles that leverage AI capabilities, and make sure that our team members are equipped to work alongside some of these AI tools. I'm going to pause there for a second and see if anyone has any questions or comments.
I think your note around the ethical leadership and like that having like a lot will come out from that was spot on. Like that gave me a pause for a moment of like, oh yeah, like there's going to be a lot that comes in that space. So I think like leaders who can do that hand in hand or equip themselves with the right partners, like, you know, being closer with their legal team or whatever it is, like it will just help them so much more in the long run.
Yeah. And I think if you go over to chat 4.0 and you type into there, how do I think about ethical considerations with AI coming? It probably would give you some really good ideas on things to consider. But you're so right, Hani. And I think this is an area that's going to continue to evolve as well. Okay, last note on AI, some key leadership considerations. What should we as leaders be thinking about? Or if you want to be a future leader, what should you be thinking about? Staying informed. We have to stay on top of these trends and advancements. This is good feedback for myself. We need to invest in training and providing development opportunities to help our employees grow and adapt these new technologies. We also need to promote ethical practices, as we just talked about. This is transparency in how AI systems are used, ensuring fairness, and then addressing any potential biases that might come up. And then finally, we need to prepare for change. A new leadership skill set or a continued leadership skill set is going to be leading through change. How do we communicate openly, bring people on the journey, address their concerns, and then also create a culture where people feel like they can be resilient and also adapt at the same time? So now that we've covered AI, let's go to our second focus within our looking ahead, which is the multi-generational workforce. So Nicole talked about this a few minutes ago, but right now, for the first time in history, we have 5 generations in the workforce. Like, that is crazy. It has never happened before. So I included Gen Alpha here just for you to become familiar. That is the next one. I guess we're back to the beginning of the alphabet. These are my kids. My kids are in Gen Alpha, and I oftentimes think about what they are going to be like at work. They can pick up my phone, they can scroll through it, they can call people, they can FaceTime, they play games. And it's really wild to me to see how it's just become so natural and innate. So that is what is coming in our future. But this level of diversity, having 5 generations in the workforce, brings both opportunities and challenges. We need to reshape what it means to lead in this type of environment. So we can talk about it. Let's do a very quick recap of each of these generations. So builders, those are people who really value loyalty, stability, respect for hierarchy. And they and our baby boomers might be thinking about what their legacies are going to be, what retirement might look like in the near or not so distant future. They emphasize hard work, team collaboration, and they're often in leadership positions. One thing that I should have said already that I didn't is that we don't want to generalize people too much. People are still people. So that's the one watch out that I would say as we think about the multi-generational workforce. Everyone is still different. So we need to treat people as individuals, which goes back to transformational leadership. But there are some traits that we can learn about as we examine these different generations. Gen X, those are people who were born between 1965 and 1980. They're known for independence, adaptability, work-life balance, also work ethic. I coach a lot of people who are in this generation, and it's interesting because they often talk about how hard it is to manage other generations. We have our Gen Y, also known as millennials. They seek purpose, continuous feedback, value diversity and technology. Gen Y or millennials used to get a bad rap, but then Gen Z came along, and these are our digital natives, and they bring so much goodness to the workforce because they help us embrace technology. They're flexible. They show up with a lot of authenticity. They're really focused on innovation. This is the group that graduated high school during the pandemic. They started their first jobs in the workforce hybrid or remote. So there's so much that goes beyond just how people show up, but it's the history and the ways that they have evolved over time. And then again, we have our Gen Alpha, and those are our little ones today. Let's talk about some implications for leadership that we need to keep top of mind for the multi-generational workforce. So we need to be able to adapt our leadership style even more than ever before. Leaders have to be versatile. We need to be able to say, I'm going to manage one person in this way and another person in a different way. And I need to keep in mind all that they come with in terms of where they are in our different generations. This might mean tailoring communication style, feedback methods, and how we motivate them to actually get work done. The second piece here is really fostering intergenerational collaboration. So as leaders, we need to find ways to encourage collaboration between these generations. If you think back to what that actually looks like tangibly from the slide before, it means creating channels for dialogue where employees can talk about what they need. It means working on relationships between managers and their team members who might be of different generations or even the same. It also means addressing conflict and misunderstanding. So leaders have to be prepared to really handle potential conflicts that might arise from the different generations in the workforce. And then finally, we have to do proactive talent planning. So as I mentioned, there are two generations that might be thinking about retirement. What does that mean? How do we transfer knowledge from their brains into our current workforce? So we need to plan for new arrivals and also departures. We need to facilitate knowledge transfer between these different people and cross-generational teams in our workforce. Any questions or thoughts on the different generations? Okay, so we talked about two of today's most pressing challenges, the very fast pace of automation and AI in the workforce. And then we also talked about the multi-generational and cross-generational groups that we have in the workplace today. So let me hear from you. You can go ahead and type into the chat. Based on that, which behaviors do you think will be most crucial in 2034? Which leadership behaviors do you think will be most crucial in the next 10 years? I see listen to learn. What else? We have an agreement with listening going to be key. Anything else that you can think of? Flexibility. Yep, having that open mind. Inclusiveness. All right, let's take a look. So as you see here, we have 7 leadership behaviors of the future. This comes from a source called Conscious Leadership Pathways. And here's what they are. So number 1, technological know-how. As leaders, we need to be able to at least speak the language at a very high level. We don't have to necessarily get into the weeds and be a subject matter expert. We need to be able, though, to guide our teams and give them feedback. And that's all about having that know-how, or at least being open and willing to learn and adapt. Number 2, data-driven decision-making. Nicole mentioned decision-making earlier as being a huge leadership trait of the future, and it is. And I'll add here that we need to do it based on data and research and insights. We talked a lot about this, but we're going to have to look at that collaboration between machine and human. What are the impacts? How are we leading through it? And how are we supporting our employees through it as well? We need to continue to adapt. We need to train our brains to be flexible. And we also need to be thinking about cultural sensitivities. I've seen this especially in the past couple of years. I also work with a lot of international companies. We need to be thinking about how different cultures show up in the workplace. And we need to be sensitive to that and use it as an opportunity for diversity. Cohesive collaboration. So collaboration is going to be key, especially when we think about those different generations. How do we bridge some gaps? And then finally, this came up earlier, but emotional intelligence. How are we putting ourselves in someone else's shoes? Leading with empathy, listening, getting curious to see what people mean and what they need. So these are the leadership behaviors of the future. What can we do about all of this? This is a lot of information. What can we actually do? So we took a look back. We talked about how leadership has evolved over time. We looked at what leadership looks like today in terms of the current landscape and how we need to adapt to continuous change. And then we looked ahead, driving into how change is going to continue into the future, specifically around AI and having a multi-generational workforce. And then we looked at the key leadership skills of the future. So what does this even mean? What can we actually do about it besides feel overwhelmed? So number 1, hone our change leadership skills. So we talked about how change management is going to be key. How do we deal with ongoing change and uncertainty? Technology adoption. How do we stay adaptable? And how do we communicate with this new pace and new ways of working in the workforce? Number 2, focus on building leader of the future capabilities. We talked about this, empathy, curiosity. A big piece of this is optimism. So how do we stay positive and realistic about what the future holds? And all of that is EQ, or emotional intelligence. And then finally, understanding and tailoring your style based on your audience. Let's continue on this path of transformational leadership, thinking about the situations, the people, the cultural implications in front of us, and really connecting people to their purpose or the purpose of our organizations. As we wrap up today, I'll pause in a moment for questions, but I just wanted to have you reflect for a moment. What's one action that you can take coming out of today? So if you type your notes, if you write down your notes, pick up your pen, just write into a notes sheet. I want to know, what action are you prepared to take coming out of today? If we write things down, we're more likely to do them. So I'll pause for a minute and give you a chance to do that. So there are some resources here that I mentioned. If you just Google HBR, New Rules of Executive Presence, or Conscious Leadership Pathways, those leadership qualities, you can read more. Those are the sources if you're interested. And with that, I want to thank you all for being here and see what questions you might have, if any.
Absolutely. So I would love to kind of follow up with what you just called out in terms of resources. Are there any resources that you would highly recommend for those looking to grow their leadership skills, be it a publication or a group or something even local, that you think exists in multiple places that you would encourage everyone to take part in?
Yeah, I think so. There are a few things. HBR is like my go-to source. I love it. There's so much on there. So even if you just go to the Harvard Business Review website, you can find materials and resources on pretty much any leadership topic. I also love First Round Review. So this is part of First Round Capital. And their First Round Review is a source of inspiration, mostly for scaling companies, but also they do a lot around product leadership, marketing leadership. They have this article that is pretty famous called "Give Away Your Legos." So how do I continue to build my leadership by empowering others as well? So First Round Review has great resources. The last thing that I would say is there are networking groups that are either in person locally or virtual. So groups like Venwise is a good example. It brings people together in a similar function. So again, all leaders who are in product, all people who are COOs, and you have almost this mentorship peer group that's run by a coach where you can start to get ideas and coaching and mentoring and peer feedback on some of the things that you're facing.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Well, feel free to connect. My contact info is here on the screen. I would love to hear from you if there's anything else that might be helpful or valuable. And I look forward to staying in touch, especially through the Emory community.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for leading today's conversation. And thank you, of course, to everyone who joined us live today. We do encourage you to schedule a complimentary career strategy session with one of our alumni coaches and advisors like Sarah. You'll receive an email following today's session that will include a short link to a survey, as well as more information about connecting with Sarah and our other career experts. So we encourage you to share your feedback and hope that you'll plan to join us for a future session. Our next webinar is actually up next Tuesday, October 9th, with our career coach, Steve Mann. It's focused on job search. So your job search blueprint, building a strategic campaign. On behalf of the Emory Alumni Association, we want to thank you again, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Okay, hello.
It's still recording. Do you want me to stop it?